Hello. Today we're going over the matchup graphs for wide receiver, running back, and quarterback. Today I'm actually starting off with the receivers, and I'll do my favorite value for each. For a receiver, the value, maybe not a value, depends on how you describe it. But my number one guy that I just love this week when I just look at his matchup more and more, that is Deebo Samuel. He's kind of always going to be ranked as a wide receiver one this year without Brandon Ayuk now, but Tampa Bay specifically, one, they're not amazing against the pass, but they just match up perfectly for Deebo. They are number one in two different things, and neither one is something to be bad in number one in. Tampa Bay, they are number one in zone coverage rate, and they are number one in blitz percentage. But when you're playing against Deebo Samuel, zone coverage is where he eats the most, especially when we're talking yards to catch, that sort of thing. Blitz, he's kind of that first option for Purdy, especially when you get a blitz and guys in front of him, blocking, screens, anything creative, and Shanahan is off a bye. So I love just the ceiling that he brings with his yards after catch. He has great touchdown regression coming, as in he's probably going to be scoring more because he's gotten a little unlucky, even have had a couple recently that got called back for penalties, stuff like that. It's going to happen eventually. I would be very surprised if it doesn't happen soon, even maybe this week. The three shadows I want to talk about real quick, none of them really great this week. A lot of it's like one or two. I'm like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. These three, they're kind of all bad. It's all the top guys that usually are shadowing this week. So Hopkins has Surtain. Obviously, Hopkins was amazing last week. Would be confident starting him in most situations. Surtain obviously makes it the toughest, has consistently been the hardest corner to go against fantasy. Last week was the first time this season, finally, that we saw someone do good against them. That was Zay Flowers. And they use Zay in a very unique way, and like he's the wide receiver one in a low passing volume offense, really good in yards after catch and like those special plays, design targets. So if anyone were to beat Surtain, like I would kind of expect it to be a guy like Zay Flowers, and it's Mahomes. He's playing a division rival, so anything can happen. But I wouldn't expect a great day from Hopkins. Still okay in the flex there. A guy that I'm less confident in, even just as a flex play, if I had to start between the two of them, would be DJ Moore. There's three Bears receivers. New England, pretty stingy against the pass in general, and they're going to stick Gonzalez on him on the outside. So don't love that. Adunze is actually the leading receiver right now. The whole passing game in general hasn't been good. The coaching hasn't been good. And it's one of those things where it's, okay, you have Andy Reid for the Chiefs. If you're shadowing the best guy on the Chiefs offense, I have more faith in Andy Reid to be able to get him in the balls in different ways. DJ Moore, not the same. With that coaching last year, maybe, but with Shane Waldron now, not really. So not as confident in that one. The third one over here is McLaurin, kind of right where Hopkins is. He's going to be shadowed by Porter Jr. Thomas Jr., if he is healthy, I expect him to do great. Last week he played, wasn't fully healthy, only got 4 targets, but they are really good. So they get Minnesota this week. They are really good against the run, and Minnesota's probably going to be winning. So that always sets up well for him. They're probably not going to run the ball a bunch. They're probably going to be losing. Even when they do run the ball, they're probably not going to do it very well. And he has a great matchup where in total, Minnesota is 30th against receivers this year. Ingram, kind of that short, reliable target guy, but Brian Thomas obviously brings that ceiling every single week with how he is using that offense. Another guy that I'm obsessed with this week, and it makes me so sad because he's probably not going to play. But I included him anyways because he was still a little more questionable than he is right now. That's Nico Collins, right in that area where Thomas Jr. and Samuel are. And if Dell is a huge increase if Nico sits. But Detroit, they definitely bring problems to this offense. And Stroud hasn't been playing his best. A big part of that is the pressure, and that's not going to stop with Detroit, I would expect. But in terms of Detroit's in their matchup, they haven't been great against receivers, and they are number one in man coverage. And what we have seen at a very high predictable rate in the past is that when Nico is in the game against man coverage, Stroud is throwing in the ball. It is very similar to Hurts and A.J. Brown that I talk about a decent bit. Similar with Stroud and Nico. So when he's going against the most man coverage he'll probably ever get in a matchup, and they're not the greatest against receivers anyways, it really works well. So even if he's in a limited spot, say they announce he's only going to run 50% of the routes, I would probably still play Nico Collins in that situation. Addison is on the other side of that matchup. With T.J. Hockenson last week, Hockenson wasn't even playing a bunch, and we just kind of saw the future more of the low volume Addison role. I think they threw 34 times off the top of my head. He had 5 targets. He caught all 5, and he had a touchdown. So it worked. Is he going to catch all 5 of his targets? Is he going to get more than 5 targets? That's like a 15% share, basically. Not the greatest. Amazing matchup for him, especially his 2 things that he's best at is what Jacksonville does a bunch. Jacksonville is first in cover 2 percentage and top 5 in man percentage. Addison versus man coverage this year is the wide receiver 6 versus cover 2, also top 10. So I really like him for a ceiling shot, but at the same time, risky just because I'm not super confident in Addison's volume right now. Maybe that'll shake out a little bit better weeks to come, but with TJ back, it makes a little bit of a nervous play, even though he does have that upside this week. Cooper and Shakir right here, if someone were to tell me that they both sucked this week, they both did amazing this week, or one did really good and one did really bad, I would expect that third option. I think one does really good, and I think one does really bad. Who? I don't know. But Indy's a great matchup for either of them, really. Shakir has the yards after catch, has a little bit more of a target share right now, just being that slot guy, that first read a lot of the times against blitz and all that sort of thing. But Cooper, obviously, the more experienced player, a little bit our upside. I just don't think both will hit because they are already low volume in the passing attack. And Indy, 1, is probably going to lose, and 2, allows more rushing against them. Not just like rushing yards, but just like rushing rate and rushing attempts. Like people just run on them because you can, and you're usually winning, even though they're like 4-4, 4-5 or something like that. So I would just expect it to be a low volume passing day like it usually is, but even lower maybe. And when they have all of their targets healthy, I don't think Keon will be in, so that'll definitely help. But is he able to support both receivers and then maybe James Cook and Kincaid too? That's where I think one of them will probably bust. One will probably have a good day on that matchup. Waddle's another guy that's kind of been similar to those two where the volume hasn't been there. And not even when Tua was out. When Tua was out, you couldn't really start any of them. Like Achane's the RB1 right now when Tua was in, and he was unstartable when Tua was out. Like that's how big of a gap it was. Waddle still hasn't gotten the target share. It's been a low sample size, but only a 12% target share this year with Tua. So, Rams, they're 30th against those outside receivers. That is where Waddle's going to be primarily. Overall, a really great matchup. Overall, the last couple of years, I would be like, I love it. Waddle's an easy start. Why would you not play Waddle? But when he's getting like 4 or 5 targets compared to the last couple of years where he's gotten 7 or 8, tight end's getting a little more. Achane for sure is getting a little bit more. It just hurts him the most. So I would say he's very similar to Addison like I was talking about earlier. Downs in the slot there. If Pittman is out, that's where he becomes a great start in my opinion. Because Flacco's not great. He's still going to throw to Downs a bunch. Pittman has not been, he's had one good game with Flacco, and that's about it this year, but still gets some targets. So if Pittman is out and Downs becomes that number 1 guy, Buffalo, the biggest thing for me is they don't allow anything downfield. They're first in average depth of target in terms of their defense. It's a lot of soft coverages. Everything kind of goes underneath on them, which for Pittman or Donnie Mitchell, Alec Pierce, whoever it is on the outside, it's usually going vertical. Worse for them, Downs in the slot when his ADOT is already like 5 yards or whatever it is. You don't mind that it has the potential for being that 10 target, easy PPR type of day. So don't mind Downs, and if Pittman is out, I think he's a great start overall. Pickens in this spot. The weird thing for this is he's going against Washington, not as great of a matchup as it used to be. And the question for the week is how much is Lattimore going to play? He could not play at all. He could play most likely, I would say, like a limited snaps. And corner is one of those where you can kind of tell them very quickly their job, at least on certain plays here and there, and get them out on the field compared to learning a whole offensive playbook. So Pickens, if he's going against Lattimore, Lattimore is the number 1 corner right now in fantasy points per route run against, so that's not a good thing. But Pickens, the touchdown upside for sure is there. He has 9 end zone targets in the year. He's caught 1 of them. He's probably caught a few more that haven't counted because of penalty, other stuff that happened, but he hasn't been scoring even though he's gotten the volume to have his normal touchdowns that he's had in the past. If Lattimore is not on him, his primary corner, or if Lattimore is just not even playing, would be St-Juste, which has kind of been the opposite of Lattimore this year, allowing some of the most in fantasy points per route run against. They're a man coverage team. They're a cover 2 team, similar to how Jacksonville plays it. And that fits really well with Pickens, especially with his strength. When you're playing man, especially cover 2 is a little softer coverage, but Pickens this year has dominated against it. Man coverage, that's not a shock. You can throw it up to him, and that's what Russ will do too. Mooney, another one. All these injuries, man. Mooney, if Drake London plays, he's kind of his normal. If he doesn't play, he's going to get pretty ridiculous volume, I would say. Like 10 plus targets, I would say, is close to a lock. He had a ridiculous first read target share last week. Over half of the first read targets were to Darnell Mooney. He's going up against the number 1 corner in points per route in Marshawn Lattimore. But he's gone now. So the replacement, obviously not nearly as good as it used to be. Saints, a little bit of a weird team right now. I have no idea what they're doing. Everything they do confuses me. But Mooney overall, pretty solid there. Ladd McConkey, a guy that I've loved and loved and loved, and Chargers are finally passing more and more and more. It makes him so valuable now that they're actually throwing the ball. They found out that they had a guy named Justin Herbert, and everything is coming together. Tennessee is a really good passing defense. 2 things, though. He's in the slot. That helps him a little bit. And Tennessee does allow most of their receiving yards that they do through after the catch. Kind of similar to Buffalo. More of that, where it's shorter A-dot targets, more yards after the catch. Helps Ladd, especially when some people wouldn't expect it. He is great in yards after catch. He is great at so many different things. But yards after catch, another one of those things, similar to a Shakir, bunch of guys in those slot that are good at it, and then you got your Tyler Lockett's or other guys that aren't as good. But he is 3rd right now in the NFL among receivers in missed tackles forced. Love that when he's going against a Titans team. He's 3rd in missed tackles forced on like not many catches. Like he's like top 30, top 40 probably in receptions. But these last 2 weeks he's been a wide receiver 2, and he's set up better than you would expect just looking at the raw matchup on like your ESPN matchup grade. It says like Tennessee's 3rd or whatever they are on that. Marv, on the other hand, continues to kind of go through hell in this back half of the season. Everybody that he plays. Last week he got Jalen Johnson. This week gets Gardner and Reed. It's a low volume offense. It's a lack of creative offense. Like I was talking about with Reed earlier, it's similar here as with DJ Moore. You go against really good corners. They're playing man coverage on you. It's tough to win or ask your guy to win consecutively over and over and over if you're not using him in a creative way. And they're most likely not going to do that. So when he's already getting low volume, those 7 targets, 5 target games, when you're doing that against Sauce and Reed when they're playing 40% man coverage, it's really tough. They do allow teams to throw deep on them, not successfully even really, but teams throw deep on them a lot, try it, and that's the hope for Marvin Harrison Jr. is like, does he get one of those deep balls as one really big explosive plays? But in general, it is a pretty scary spot. Quarterbacks, starting with a guy kind of a little more opposite of Debo, a guy that probably won't be played in most leagues, but that's Sam Darnold, and he has a great matchup this week, and it fits him very well, similar to Debo, a lot of guys that I choose. But for Darnold specifically, especially with the coaching there, when he usually plays a good matchup, he usually does well. His last 3, Detroit, Rams, Indy. Detroit is not bad against quarterbacks, but they are against receivers, and that's kind of the strength of the offense, at least at that point. Had 17. Then the Rams, great matchup, 18. Colts, great matchup, 21. Week before those was the Jets, and he scored 5. So I think he's a little more predictable in terms of matchup guys there. And then when you're playing to the strengths of him, lots of man, lots of cover 2, those 2 combos that they're talking about with Jacksonville earlier with Addison, that comes into play with Darnold. Jefferson, incredible. There's not really a reason to talk about Jefferson like I was talking about Addison earlier because everyone's going to start Justin Jefferson. Love him this week, but similar like Darnold. Same reason that I like both of those 2. And all of his weapons are back. Like with Hawkinson there, Aaron Jones out of the backfield too, which they're horrible guarding running backs and receiving. So another weapon out of the backfield there where he has a great weapon in terms of a receiving running back. Everything is at his disposal. It all sets up for him towards his strengths. I like it for a ceiling type of play this week. Allen and Hurts, like their normal, but in great matchups this week, even better. Justin Herbert, the volume that I was talking about earlier. In the past month, the Bengals are first in neutral pass rate. And I think in the first month, they were also first in neutral pass rate. Basically in those situations where you're not down by a ton or up by a ton, and it's kind of more the first and second and 5, not like 3rd and inches type of plays. That's what I'm talking about. Second in pass rate, Justin Herbert, now over this past month, behind that Bengal team. So they're throwing a ton. Like you'll see tonight how much the Bengals are actually throwing just compared to other teams. Chase Brown got a bunch of carries, but that's because he was the only running back to not have or to get a carry last week, 27 for 27. So Tennessee, they are better than average versus the pass. They're actually in this green because of how they are against rushing quarterbacks, and they're really good against rushing running backs, or just the ground in general. So I think in a game where the Chargers, they might not be able to run the ball a ton over and over and over like they kind of want to do or have wanted to do in the past. It kind of force them into that newer habit of throwing the ball more consistently because that's kind of where they have the advantage even compared to the run. It just has to have the game script kind of stay the same where they're not just up by a ton and constantly winning. Purdy versus Tampa Bay. Overall pretty fine. Like Debo there, obviously. Kittle there. CMC being there definitely changes things, but Tampa Bay is not the greatest against receiving running backs, really good on the ground against running backs, and that definitely helps Purdy's case here, especially when if they use him limited more. Baker Mayfield, they are good against the pass. They are good against tight ends, and that's kind of all he has right now. And that's San Francisco that I'm talking about. The defense on the other side, they're kind of always good on the interior, and Shepard might be out now too. So in general, I don't love it just because like it's hard to see where the points are coming from. It's not as predictable. Like he can totally do it. He's done it kind of over and over again. So he's a fine start, but it's a really tough spot for him to be in general. Knicks, that's where it's one of those where it's like I kind of hate it. He's playable. He's been awesome. He's been incredible. At the same time, it's on the road as a rookie quarterback in Arrowhead against Spags on the other side, and they don't have a run game. They will not, at least. That's my guess. Also, Javonte Williams over on the far left over here. Kansas City has not allowed anything versus running backs. And Denver, it's just going to have to come through a lot of the checkdowns. His average depth of target and his downfield throws have increased a little bit. But overall, it's a great defensive scheme, especially when you're against a rookie quarterback and he's on the road. It just makes it tough. I don't see as likely of a path if it's not coming through his legs. Kyler versus the Jets. Another tough one, similar thing. He can do it on the ground. His rushing volume hasn't really been there. The matchup, obviously, with the corners there, not the greatest. Overall, there's lots of tough matchups. May over here, same type of thing. Daniels, obviously, you're starting. Mahomes is startable, especially with Hopkins, but even like Broncos on that other side. Like I think it's just going to be one of those ugly games. Chiefs get control, win from their rushing and defense, and maybe Knicks and Mahomes both kind of don't do a ton there. My favorite running back on the week has been kind of everyone's favorite running back over this past month, and that's the bottom right here with Tracy Jr. The bottom right is because he has an incredible matchup, but the projected volume is 23rd this week, I think, is that's what that's saying. 23rd out of the running backs that are now on Thursday Night Football going forward. So the volume isn't projected to be the most incredible, but when we look at this matchup, the Giants are usually losing. And they still have run the ball a good amount with him, and he's just getting more and more snaps over Singletary. And the Carolina Panthers, also not good. So when you put both of them together and you punish Germany, I think they do have a better game script than normal, and hopefully are running more than normal against Carolina, who's 36 against the rush. He's had 16 attempts in 4 of his last 5 games. So now you pair that with a great matchup and hopefully a better game script, the ability to run on the ground there. I really like it for a ceiling, especially with the ceiling that he showed us just on the ground alone. And he has the receiving ability too. The opposite side of that matchup, you got Hubbard. And it's kind of a similar thing. Like the Panthers haven't been great, but we saw last week wasn't the greatest matchup for Hubbard, but it stayed a close game and they give him the volume. So I know Brooks might be back, but with how they've done Brooks this season, and of course this would probably happen, but I very doubt they're going to put Brooks in there and give him like 15 touches in week 1. Like I'm guessing Brooks will get a few touches in his first week back, something like that. So I'm not too worried when it comes to Hubbard. He's had 17 touches in 7 straight games. 17 touches every single week. And now he plays against a Giants defense that isn't bad. I want to give the Giants credit. Their defense actually isn't bad. They've been put in a ton of horrible spots because of the offense, and I think because they have a bad record, people just assume that their defense is horrible. But their defense isn't horrible. However, Carolina's offensive line has been pretty good so far in terms of run blocking, and the Giants' defensive line has kind of been the opposite in terms of run defense. So he has a solid matchup there. He's going to get the volume, basically a guarantee. So I like him this week too. Going up to this top right, Aaron Jones, massive positive touchdown regression, kind of like I talked about Debo earlier. Jacksonville is 32nd against the receiving running backs. Could happen there like it did with Barkley last week, Achane. But even if it doesn't, I think it could come on the ground too, at least in these next couple of weeks. Like, it's got to be coming soon. He's getting the goal line work finally. Like, just get in the end zone. Get in the end zone. He's got to get there. If McCaffrey is in, like, you got to play him. Tampa Bay is really stingy against the run, like I was talking about, but they're 31st to the receiving, and they don't have Ayuk. So I think even if he's limited, like, he's by far the best fantasy player last year, 2 years ago. However, whatever year you want to choose, really, over the last 5, like, he is well above the next guy there. So if he plays 25% of the snaps, I would still probably recommend him. He's a different guy. Stevenson and Swift, again, in this same matchup. For Stevenson, they are great against the pass. Chicago, I don't know if New England will be able to move the ball a bunch, because usually like, oh, they're good against the pass, but we can run on them. But like the Patriots offense, it's a little different. I just don't know how well they're going to be able to move the ball against them. Helps Swift on the other side for sure. I like it for Swift a lot better, both in solid matchups overall, but it's just one of those games I usually don't mess with. Two offenses that have been doing really bad, two defenses that are doing pretty solid, and coaches that I don't really trust. So it's a tough start. I don't think Stevenson gets the volume to make up for a bad day if he doesn't score. He's been scoring so much recently, which is awesome, but that's not going to stay like that forever. He's not the best running back in the league. Like Christian McCaffrey last year had a worse touchdown to attempt ratio than Stevenson has right now, and he scored like 25 touchdowns or whatever it was. So I don't think it's going to keep up for Stevenson. Does he get the volume and the production to counteract that? I don't know if he doesn't get in the end zone. Bijan, up in this top center. He has played really well against the Saints in the past, and the Saints are just on the downhill in general. He was injured versus them earlier this season. So that was one of those where he wasn't as good. And then these last 4 games, he's been healthy. He's still getting that volume that he was getting in the early part of the season. 20 points, 20 points, 20 points, 20 points. Last year, when he wasn't that good, everyone hated Bijan. He was like the RB14 or something, but they hated him obviously because he was drafted in the first round. His 2 great games, though, were against the Saints. 26 points against the Saints last year and 27 points versus the Saints last year. Wouldn't be shocked at all if he continues that streak of 20-plus points to go forward. James Cook down here, the receiving is low, but he's got Indy. And when your receiving hasn't really been great in terms of fantasy, it's a great time to go against Indy because they're probably going to run the ball 50 times and no one's going to be shocked. It's happened again and again against the Colts. Flacco on the other side doesn't really help. Buffalo could get him a lot of touches, hopefully, for his sake. Keep Ray Davis off the field a little bit, but I think he gets in the end zone there. Wouldn't be shocked if he does on the ground. Dobbins, not the greatest matchup. Like I was saying, Tennessee is 4th versus the run. He's still playable. Obviously, the volume has been great. Not as great as a lot of his other matchups. And then Mixon versus Detroit. Detroit has played some elite running backs. I was looking at their schedule earlier, just looking through all this. So many of the top running backs in the league have played against Detroit, and they're 5th against running backs right now. When you adjust it, like how all this is, they are 2nd best against running backs. They have been extremely good. Same time, Mixon, in his healthy games this year, has scored 16 fantasy points in every single one of them. Over that, for the most part, obviously. But at least 16 in every single start. So you got to start him. Like, there's no way that people sit Mixon. But it is one of those spots where they've played a lot of elite running backs, and they usually only score like 14, unless it was like Kenneth Walker blow-up week where he had 3 touchdowns. But still, wasn't like electric on the ground. I think it was like 80 yards, but 3 touchdowns. And then lastly, the only one that's a harder matchup when you're talking about running backs is the aforementioned Javonte Williams. Kansas City has been incredible against running backs in general, and they control the ball so well, and the defense is great overall. And now they're going into Arrowhead with the rookie quarterback, like I said, and I just don't trust Javonte. It's a very low touchdown odds. I think like the way he's successful is if he just has like that 10 target game, which can happen for Denver, but especially if you're like watching this in a standard league for some reason, not playing PPR, half PPR at least, like that's where it's like he's in a atrocious spot. His volume is getting better. It's improving above like a Tracy Jr. or Hubbard, even that sort of thing. But still, I don't think that counteracts when you're going against Kansas City, who has just been. I want to look real quick, just so we're looking at average points to running backs. The most average team in the NFL, they get exactly what a fantasy running back usually always gets, is Green Bay and Los Angeles Rams. The Chiefs, so instead of 0.0 compared to the average, they are at negative 8.3. So if Javonte is averaging like 14, they're expecting that the Denver running backs to score 8.3 points per game, less than what they do. The second best, that Detroit team that I was mentioning, they're only at minus 4.8. So the Chiefs are basically 2 times better than everybody. And the majority of that is coming on the ground, but they're also pretty great against receiving running backs too. So even when Javonte, if you're counting on those targets, like I don't think it turns into 10 targets and 100 yards and a touchdown. It'll probably be like 10 targets for 6 catches and 40 yards. So that's the goal there. Not a great goal. But that's the matchups for the week. If you guys like this video, like, subscribe. Up to 4,000 now, which I was proud about. So thank you, fellas. Love it, and see you guys soon.